It is astounding how significantly one idea can shape a society and its policies. Consider this one. If taxes on the rich go up, job creation will go down. This idea is an article of faith for Republicans and seldom challenged by Democrats, and has indeed shaped much of the economic landscape. But sometimes the ideas that we are certain are true are dead wrong. Consider that for thousands of years, humans believed that the Earth was the center of the universe. It's not, and an astronomer who still believed that it was would do some pretty terrible astronomy. Likewise, a policymaker who believes that the rich are job creators and therefore should not be taxed will do equally terrible policy. I have started or helped start dozens of companies and initially hired lots of people. But if there was no one around who could afford to buy what we had to sell, all those companies and all those jobs would have evaporated. That's why I can say with confidence that rich people don't create jobs, nor do businesses large or small. Jobs are a consequence of a circle of life-like feedback loop between customers and businesses. And only consumers can set in motion this virtuous cycle of increasing demand and hiring. In this sense, an ordinary consumer is more of a job creator than a capitalist like me. That's why when business people take credit for creating jobs, it's a little bit like squirrels taking credit for creating evolution. It's actually the other way around. Anyone who's ever run a business knows that hiring more people is a course of last resort for capitalists. It's what we do if and only if rising consumer demand requires it. And in this sense, calling ourselves job creators isn't just inaccurate, it's disingenuous. That's why our existing policies are so upside down. When the biggest tax exemptions and the lowest tax rates benefit the richest, all in the name of job creation, all that happens is that the rich get richer. Since 1980, the share of income for the top 1% of Americans has more than tripled, while our effective tax rates have gone down by 50%. If it was true that lower taxes for the rich and more wealth for the wealthy led to job creation, today we would be drowning in jobs. And thank you. And yet, unemployment and underemployment is at record highs. Another reason that this idea is so wrong-headed is that there can never be enough super rich people to power a great economy. Somebody like me makes hundreds or thousands of times as much as the median American, but I don't buy hundreds or thousands of times as much stuff. My family owns 3 cars, not 3,000. I buy a few pairs of pants and shirts a year like most American men. Occasionally we go out to eat with friends. I can't buy enough of anything to make up for the fact that millions of unemployed and underemployed Americans can't buy any new cars, any clothes, or enjoy any meals out. Nor can I make up for the falling consumption of the vast majority of middle-class families that are barely squeaking by, buried by spiraling costs and trapped by stagnant or declining wages. Here's an incredible fact, that if the typical American family still retained the same share of income that they did in 1970, they'd earn like $45,000 more a year. Imagine what our economy would be like if that were the case. Significant privileges have come to people like me, capitalists, for being perceived as job creators at the center of the economic universe, and the language and metaphors we use to defend the current economic and social arrangements is telling. It's a small jump from job creator to the creator. This language obviously this language was not chosen by accident. And it's only honest to admit that when somebody like me calls themselves a job creator, we're not just describing how the economy works, but more particularly, we're making a claim on status and privileges that we deserve. Speaking of special privileges, the extraordinary differential between the 15% tax rate that capitalists pay on carried interest, dividends, and capital gains, and the 35% top marginal rate on work that ordinary Americans pay, is kind of hard to justify without a touch of deification. We've had it backwards for the last 30 years. Rich people like me don't create jobs. Jobs are a consequence of an ecosystemic feedback loop between customers, and businesses. And when the middle class thrives, businesses grow and hire, and owners profit.
You're insinuating that there's a socialism type or welfareism that is promised one generation to the next. That's not in the Constitution. That's sort of eccentric concoction of welfare transfer, through force of government. But if you care about people, you have to endorse sound money, personal liberty, incentives to get ahead, peace and trade. These are the things that will take care of people. And we have accepted this sort of social contract you talk about for the last 100 years. And look at where we are. Look at what's happened in the last 20 years. Look at what's happened since the year 2000. Look at what's happened in the last 5 years. It's downhill. So what do we get? Education for kids. They're graduating. They have more debt, no education, and no jobs. That's what your social contract is giving you.
A bit of a personal question then. Are you on Social Security? Do you get Social Security checks?
I do.
Well, you just told younger generations that they should wean themselves off this social contract.
That is true.
But you haven't done it yourself.
This woman, Ayn Rand, also, she really was kind of harsh on the ideas of government benefits for the poor and so on and so forth. She found these people to be lacking in either creativity or drive to go out and do good for themselves, and they don't deserve to have the government gun put in someone else's face for taxes and then given to them. I understand that. I do. However, at the end of her lifetime, she lived in America, was married to a guy with the last name O'Connor, so she filed for Social Security benefits and Medicare benefits when she needed them as an older person. And for someone who was so against pointing the government gun at people who were, as you can see where this is going, she's still then putting the government gun at someone else's face and getting that money from them. And it's just kind of amusing, or shall I say hypocritical, for her to do such a thing.
I think that right now the question is, do we all work for central bankers? That's what I want to address to our guest tonight. Is this global governance at last? Is it one world, the central bankers in charge? Jim Iorio, you say we've got some downside here, a correction in the markets. Fine. But aren't we all just living and dying for what the central banks do? Aren't we all just counting on the fact that there's a Bernanke put and that we won't go any lower than, say, 5% down from here?
Of course we are, because if we look at the economic data, there's nothing to get excited about in that. So yesterday we saw some reluctance for the Bernanke Fed to expand their balance sheets and pump more money in. But the stock market knows that reluctance is totally different than not willing to do it at all. And that's why we saw oil implode and gold trade off heavily, because they're not a protected class. If the stock market starts trading off in the 10 to 15 to 20% area, the chairman's going to come in and throw some stimulus at it. So to answer your question, we are absolutely slaves to central banks, and we'd love to be slaves of the economy, but the economic numbers continue to do nothing but trend lower.
Mr. LeCamp, do we work for the central bankers?
We know that.
Mr. LeCamp,
we do. This is free. We do. Look, markets are driven by policy now. They're not driven by market forces. They're driven by fiscal cliffs. They're driven by central bank proclamations. They're driven by false rumors coming out of the ECB.
Fiat currency that's continually watered down. They continue to water our currency down so the markets go up and we feel good about it.
Yeah, and listen to what the Fed did this weekend. I think they really screwed up here. They said that we're going to do this Operation Twist through the end of the year. In other words, they're going to create uncertainty about what happens after Operation Twist, right at the same time that the fiscal cliff kicks in. Do we really want all that uncertainty?
Jim, but we have to give the Fed a break here, because the Fed realizes that what they're doing is probably going to have very little economic effect. The only real thing that can help is fiscal and policy changes. So the Fed, all they have is rocks and stones left. They're just going to throw them. problem. They know that they're probably not going to do any good as well.
Gentlemen, Jim and Jim.
Isn't that why we know that there's going to be QE3? Isn't that why we know there ultimately will be QE3?
That's what I'm banking on.
I love what you said there, Jim LeCamp, about the idea that
ultimately there will be.
Jim LeCamp, which Jim? I'm not sure which one said this, but that we're basically beholden to what the central bankers and policymakers do, rather than to the fundamentals in the economy, because we have not been able to generate real growth without doing one of two things. That is debasing the currency or borrowing our way to a false prosperity. Jim Iorio, how do you invest under those circumstances?
What's the question there, Ty?
How do you invest under those circumstances?
We invest because remember that every central bank in the world, not just us, ultimately has to devalue their currency. So you can't keep, you got to put your money in stuff. Big cap U.S. with good balance sheets, to me, is the world's tallest midget.
Mr. LeCamp, every major country holds gold. That tells me that it's attractive. Is it attractive to you with a watered-down currency?
I think it's very attractive both as a currency and a store of value. I agree with Jim. Ultimately, you're going to want resources.
Today we live in most troubled times. All the nations of the world seem to be undergoing some degree of change. And in order to avoid the problems that we have had for years, unemployment, military conflict, territorial disputes, the only way to resolve those problems appears to be based upon a return to a set of values that will enable us to survive. And in order to do that, I believe we have to declare all the Earth's resources as the common heritage of all the world's people, and to outgrow the monetary system, to make things available to people. All of the necessities of life must be made available. If we fail to do that, there will be territorial disputes continuously. If few nations control most of the world's resources, you're going to have territorial disputes. The problem is, can we build a sustainable world without the necessity of armies, navies, prisons, police? I believe actually if people have access to the necessities of life, meaning a relevant education, a decent home life, healthy foods available, and clean air and clean water and clean technology. Those are the necessary ingredients to make it possible for global sustainability. If we fail to do that, I think we'll have a continuation of the same problems we've had for centuries. War, depression, recession, boom. We have to agree upon a set of values that will take care of everyone without any dominant group. Even the wealthiest people today would live better in a resource-based economy. We do not have enough money to house, build hospitals, take care of most human problems. But we do have more than enough resources, and that is why we emphasize a resource-based global economy. That if people have access, free access to the necessities of life, crime would almost diminish to zero. In other words, instead of designing things to wear out and break down, to promote more people purchasing things, keeping the old system alive, we have to evolve to a newer system that is free of the conditions that produce aberrant behavior.